Okay, it's just touched 3 minutes after 12. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Booth, and I sit on the board of the South African Chamber of Commerce here in Singapore. On behalf of the Chamber, I would like to welcome all of you and thank you very much for spending your lunch hour with us today. We have organized something that I believe is going to be truly insightful, not only for parents, but also for educational professionals here in Singapore and further afield across Asia. We are joined by two fantastic speakers who I'm going to give a brief introduction to now. But before we do, today's webinar is sponsored by our platinum sponsor, St. James's Place Wealth Management. That's who I work for, and I focus very much on the South African community and bringing as much value as I can in the space of financial planning. If anyone wants to learn more about that, please visit our website or feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My name is Michael Booth. So without further ado, I would like to please introduce our guest speakers today, our panelists. So today we are joined by Mike Gilmour and Jeanette Buckley. And by way of introduction, Mike is the principal of an exciting new school in Singapore, Sentosa specifically, at Knightsbridge House. Prior to founding Knightsbridge, Mike has held both leadership and teaching positions for more than a decade in Singapore, although he looks quite young, including being the deputy principal of GEMS for half a decade. So Mike, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Michael. Good to be here.
So we are also joined by Jeanette, who is the principal of the Winstedt School. And just recently, she has been awarded as the best primary school principal in Singapore at the 2021 Singapore Education Awards. With more than 2 decades of experience as a head teacher, education director, and principal, Jeanette has a wealth of knowledge. So Jeanette, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here.
So before we begin, just one thing that I'd like to share with our audience is that something that Mike and Jeanette have in common is that they are passionate about uplifting other education professionals and then also empowering parents, which is the purpose of today's discussion. So guys, as we get into this, I'm going to now ask you some broad questions, starting with, can we have an overview of the international school environment in Singapore? Mike, could you share some of your experiences?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Michael. Well, it really is good to be here today, just to be able to talk about education. Sorry. Having been in Singapore for 10 years and worked in international schools here in 10 years, and thanks for that introduction. I've got lots to live up to now. I've definitely seen the full spectrum of international schools and offerings here, and it definitely is an exciting time to be in education in Singapore. It's a challenging time as well. If I just think back to how things evolved from when I arrived in Singapore, you know, it was a booming economy, schools were full, packages were huge, you know, I mean, your teachers were in demand. It was quite incredible. Whereas it's a very different story right now, and we're finding things a lot more challenging for schools. Economically, it's harder. There's a lot less expats in Singapore, and so schools are tending to have to fight over a diminishing market. And then also the compensation and packages that are offered to international teachers is not what it was 10 years ago, and so that's making getting high quality educators not a challenge, because Singapore is always an attractive place for foreign teachers to come and work in, but it's definitely not as easy as it was. So there's been a big shift. I think, you know, when I came back, and Jeanette will probably be able to allude to this as well, you know, there was schools, $30,000 a year plus. That's your option if you're a foreigner in Singapore, and 80% of our families, you know, the tuition will be covered by the parents' company. And so it was really a very lucrative market for schools back then. Now it's very different. When I finished off at GEMS, we had 20% of our families who were on expat packages. 80% of our families were paying $1,000 per child out of their own pocket. And so that causes parents to really question what they're getting. What value are they receiving for that hard-earned money? And then you've obviously seen the emergence of so many smaller mid-market schools into the market, which is capitalizing on this. And I can talk a bit about that in a while. But yeah, I suppose just to recap, it's an exciting time, but it is a challenging time. And that it was entering into a real metamorphosis prior to COVID. It wasn't just because of COVID. Even before that, there was a real shift taking place. So yeah, I look forward to talking about it a bit more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jeanette, do you have anything you'd like to add to that or echo any sentiments?
I'd echo a lot of what Mike said. I think the school environment in Singapore is fascinating because there's a lot of choice, but it's a very competitive market for schools, but also for in terms of choice and how parents make that decision. Like the rest of Singapore, it's always trying to be the best in everything, the best in healthcare, the best in tourism, and it's the same with education. There's this constant drive to be the best, and there's great pride in scores and how children do. So schools are incredibly competitive and very market driven. I mean, there's always a catch of why you should come to this school or why you should go to that school. And it makes it's almost blinding because you don't know what to really look for in a school because there are so many different options. And they are all quite exclusive. And as Mike said, that's changing a fair bit. And it started to change before COVID and we're seeing it more. But there's still a lot of competition for bums and seats and to make sure that you have enough students in your school. There's also a lot of branded schools. It's not just your school that you would know in South Africa as the village school or the school that everyone goes to in the neighborhood or that you know of. There's a lot of branding associated with each school. And it's, again, very confusing. It's also quite an elitist landscape because you've got the numbers, how well the students are doing. You've got these huge alumni networks who are going to Ivy League schools, and it also is quite blinding. You're trying to figure out what's the real education and what's the added and what is necessary for your own child. I think the other difficulty with Singapore education in Singapore is it is transitionary, and it's right now it's incredibly transitionary, and that's hard for students and for parents. It means that kids are losing their friends, and they do not have that set group of friends that might follow them throughout their schooling like they would back home. It's you have a friend for 2 years and you lose your friend as they move to another country. And the same happens in schools in terms of teachers. They don't see students throughout years, and leadership might change as well. And that can be a little bit difficult. You've got to be careful that you're choosing a school because of what has been set up and not because of a particular leader or a particular teacher. So choosing a school is tricky because you have a lot of choice. You're expected to make a very difficult decision. And hard, tricky.
Like it sounds extremely tricky and extremely competitive, not only for the students and for the schools as a business. But what you just said is extremely interesting, that you can't look at a school and say that's a wonderful headmaster, he's going to lead us, and there's a wonderful head of X department, because they could leave at any stage. And Mike, as well, you were saying about the salary packages. I can imagine that it's a bidding war for the very best teachers who will stay. So that's obviously some of the factors, right?
Yeah, it's a huge factor, because ultimately your school is your teachers. They are the backbone of the school, and if you haven't got passionate educators who are committed to the kids and committed to really being here, you're going to have a revolving door And then, you know, as soon as we start to see a revolving door in a school, we question the culture. And then really, if you know your child's coming into a school and their teacher's probably not going to see out the year, or every year it's just going to be a different teacher, knowing how challenging it is anyway, moving to a different country, you question how much continuity is there, right? For those educators that are coming and going. But, you know, I've heard stories of some schools, you know, large schools anticipating about 25% staff turnover this year, which is huge. You know, when I was at GEMS, we did well and we had under 3% a year. And I think that's not the norm. But I think it's just a sign of the times beyond actually what's happening in the school context. I think people are making life choices for themselves personally, deciding to either go home or move on to a different country. And you can't fault people for that. It's a pandemic. But it really has caused a big questioning, you know, in terms of the sustainability of these schools. But anyway, look, in Singapore, I always say to families visiting my school, you are absolutely spoiled for choice. There are some incredible schools in Singapore, each offering something slightly different, but essentially doing the same thing, but packaged in a different way and marketed in a different way. Depends which salesperson you speak to, right? But yeah, there are honestly some incredible schools here. And so it can be a bit daunting. Whereas I think if you had to go to, you know, if you were posted to some, you know, dorp somewhere out there and there's one school in the town, then, well, that's your option, right? There you go. But you obviously spoiled for choice now.
That's a nice segue into the very next question. And Jeanette, I could pose it to you to start with then is, you know, we've mentioned a few factors that parents are considering when they're choosing these schools for their children. But they usually do it on a very short time frame, because you arrive in a new country, you have to get an apartment, you have to get your bearings, and then you have to get the kids in school. And that usually all happens in the space of the first 2 to 3 months. So in your view, what are some of the factors that parents are considering when making these big life choices?
I think we get to see two different kinds of parents. You see the parent who has done an extreme amount of research and almost overthought the whole process, and they get caught in what everyone is saying and all the details and the marketing. Then you get another parent who, the quickest decision. This is close to my home. This is close to work. This is what the company suggested. This is what a friend has suggested. Choosing a school, it really needs to be done on the set of your family beliefs and what you believe in. You wouldn't go to any school back in South Africa. It would be a good fit for your child. You would make those decisions very carefully. And I think the same thing needs to be done in Singapore. It has to fit. It has to fit your family. If you're a sporting family, there obviously has to be enough sports facilities and the right kind of sports. It goes more to the values of the school and what the school outcomes look like for the student. What do they expect a student to gain from going to the school? Does that fit in with your family values? I think there are other factors. You know, a school might be a good fit for your neighbor, but it doesn't mean that it's a good fit for your child. Each child is different. It's a very personal philosophy, but each child learns very differently. And if you have not just one child, but 2 or 3 children, then you also need to make sure that you're choosing the right school for each of those children, not just a school and expecting all of your children to excel in the same school. I think that you need to figure out, is your child a child that can survive in a big school where they have to figure out the landscape, where to go to and the noise, or that they are that independent and they do have those skills? Or is your child quiet and reserved and they would just disappear in that crowd? Who is your child and where would they best succeed? So yeah, again, it's not a one fit for all. know your family beliefs, know what your child looks like and how best they learn. The curriculums are pretty much the same. It's the other stuff that you also need to look at. You also need to look at where you're going to be in a few years' time, and how will your child transition to the next education system. How do they transition? Are they a child that transitions easily, or do they need more social emotional support and guidance? And I think figuring out what they are comfortable with and what can they be challenged with in the right way. Don't get stuck into a brand or what the neighbors are doing. It's really getting a feel for a school and making sure that it is set up well enough to carry on in the next few years in the same way that you see it now. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Carry on forever.
I think that's a very concise summary. And Mike, are there anything else that you would add to that?
No, I think Jeanette's spot on there. I think you know, my sort of understanding of what success looks like for a school has evolved, and it probably will continue to evolve in the years to come. You know, initially we thought, you know, big school, thousands of kids, you know, that equals success. More and more now, and the more time I've actually spent in schools that size, I've come to really find the number of about 600 to 800 students for me, for a K through 12 school. I believe that's a sweet spot for education, because it can be economically profitable for the owners, but it can also be have a sense of community, you know, in it. And for me, that's the most important thing. A school is a community. And if we get too corporate, we lose something. We can't become too, you know, sort of disorganized either. We have to, you know, be professional in what we do, but there has to be a sense of community. And my encouragement to families, whenever I speak to them, is walk into the school and just, what do you feel when you walk into the school? You know, try and cut through all the marketing, all that stuff, because, you know, everyone's on commission just to try and get you, right? But what do you feel as you walk in? And that feeling, you know, often is right. And it sort of cuts through all that other stuff that you get told. And look, it doesn't mean if you walk into a school and you just don't have a good feeling that it's a bad school. It's just not the school for you, because you know what your kids are like best. You know what they need. And yeah, so that's my encouragement to families as they're walking around and are faced with this absolute barrage of amazing schools to go to with incredible facilities. But what actually is that right school for you? Just so trust your gut in that. Yeah, so that's always my encouragement to families.
I think that's excellent advice, very, very sound advice. But also what's interesting to me, Mike, is the size of the school you just mentioned, between 600 to 800. I mean, that's not necessarily a small school either.
Yeah, well, I mean, by Singapore standards, it could be, but yeah, look, and you're right. I mean, and give or take either side of that number, right? But that's sort of what, at the moment, what I'm feeling when I look and sort of see where the market is at. Because as soon as you go beyond that, you're having multiple classes per grade level, and that becomes a challenge. One of the schools I worked in here, there were 12 classes in every grade level. You could not meet together as a school. You had to meet as a grade level. And then, sure, that became another community, and you can develop a sense of community there. But, you know, for me as a principal now, although my school is very small as a startup, one of the things I love is that I know every child's name, and I know the parent's name as well. And that won't be sustainable as the school grows, but for now it is. And yeah, just the sense of connection that you can develop with kids and with their families when you are smaller is massive. I think if we look in the context of expats living in Singapore, you know, you remove from everything family, you know, networks of support in that. And so your school does become a community or family for you. And that's why you see generally a high level of parental involvement or engagement in these schools, because people are just looking for a place to connect with people. And unfortunately, if it's just too big, it becomes a bit off-putting. But a small school where families can be authentically engaged is really quite appealing. That's definitely what I've seen.
I agree, Mike. I mean, there's a number where it just a school becomes a machine after a while. It doesn't become that community, and yeah, that connection when we're so far away from home is really important.
Yeah.
I mean, look, guys, the one of the purposes of the Chamber of Commerce is for people to find that in a business community for South Africans away from home as well. It's a place you come to plug in, hear from other South African experts, and really gain for insights. So I completely hear what you're saying. But I think also what's very interesting what you guys were saying is that everything was starting to make a shift before COVID hit already. So I think it would be interesting for us now to separate that and go into the COVID part. And my first question for either of you is, has COVID impacted how parents evaluate what children need?
Yeah, maybe let me jump in first on that, and then Jeanette, I'm sure you'll have some pearls of wisdom for us. Look, as you said, Michael, the education landscape was shifting before COVID. You could see economically, people were paying more and more for their school fees out of their own pocket as opposed to on company packages. And that immediately makes people really, question where they're putting their money and what value they're receiving for that. So there was that shift happening then. And then COVID's obviously just exacerbated that, to another degree, to the point of people actually leaving Singapore because it's not economically viable anymore. But look, in terms of having COVID causing families to really question and really, I suppose, do more due diligence into where their kids are going to school, I think absolutely. I think COVID has forced families to get, closer. I know there have been some other stories where it hasn't, but generally people have sort of hunkered down a little bit in this COVID time and just sort of focused on the priorities, right? What's important today? What do I need to get through this week? And so I think from that perspective, families have got a little bit more involved in their kids' education. Obviously, they were forced to when we went into home-based learning. That was a real wake-up for everyone, right? Look, I think it definitely has forced people. The positive out of it is forced people to be more involved in their kids' education and to make more of an effort to understand what's taking place within the classroom. I've definitely noticed that.
I've noticed a change in some of the questions that parents are asking us as well. That they would ask how we prepared the students for HBL. How did our children respond to HBL? What did we do differently? And then they would usually tell us the story of how their child experienced HBL and their frustrations. So they want to know, how do you deal with it? And then the other thing is that there seems to be a priority shift in what parents are looking for. How do we deal with online technology? How do we limit technology? Because there's become that over-reliance on technology. I think parents are also worried about what gaps are missing because of HBL and COVID, and how have they been impacted social, emotionally, definitely. How they're going to respond, the behavior changes that they've seen, and then also how does it impact school life, and how is that going to change them later? So the children can't necessarily choose who they play with and when they play because of the restrictions. So again, parents want to know how we're dealing with those restrictions and what are we monitoring and how are we putting in place things that we expected growing up and we've expected in our schools, but now have to be monitored and controlled. Playtime, touch, games, everything is a little bit more restricted. And what is that impact going to be later down the line? We get a lot more questions of that.
And rightly so. I mean, children are they're in the developmental phases, right? They're learning how to interact with each other, not only with friends or people they agree with, but people that they don't agree with. And with the restrictions of children being in pairs, maybe they're paired with someone they don't agree with, and how do they deal with that? And all of this. As you both know, my fiance is a teacher as well, and when she comes home and she vents to me about the frustrations of these poor children, I learn quite a heap on this topic as well. I think that leads us to a very good question following that is, have you seen or noticed any significant differences in the students' behavior because of this, be it in development or social interaction since the onset of all of this?
From my point of view, definitely. We're Winstedt works with children who learn differently. So we've seen an increase in admissions in movement from other schools because of those frustrations and the impact that it's had on their academics, but mostly self-esteem and mostly over-reliance on technology. That's our biggest issue at the moment, and that's, for the most part, that's sort of your year 5 up to year 13. They're struggling. For the younger ones, there's more behavior, but it's shown in a very different way. We see less tolerance, less resilience, more emotional annoyances, more social annoyances and frustration. So yeah, there's definitely been an impact, and it's not, and I don't think it's necessarily just with children with needs. I think those children would not have been identified before COVID, but because of COVID, it is more obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that. I think there's generally, we've seen an uptick in terms of students requiring support services, you know, for emotional regulation, general anxiety, whatever it might be, without, you know, off the charts. And I think if you had to ask every school in Singapore and do a litmus test, they would all say something fairly similar. And there's a few other impacts. Obviously, parents are under more stress, and so that naturally is passed down to the students. Teachers are under more stress as well. And so, you know, the classroom environment, as much as we want to say it hasn't really changed or been affected, it's been fundamentally affected. The whole life of the school has over the last 2 years. And so we have to acknowledge that, and then still, you know, maintain a level of normalcy as much as we can. But it is really challenging. You know, if we think about some of our youngest learners, they're going to learn best through unstructured play. And what is the one thing we've done now? We've taken away unstructured play and give them very structured play, right? Johnny, this is your area and this is your friend. You are only allowed to play in this area with this friend for this half hour. You know, and so those social and emotional skills and development that occurs through unstructured play, you know, as you said there, Michael, making friendship choices, communicating, we're learning to collaborate with different people. That's been completely smashed, actually. And yes, there's elements of it here. We're trying to do our best to still recreate that. But the sense of just letting kids go out into the playground and just to play and to be creative and to use their imagination, that's gone. And so we have to make sure that we're maintaining that. And so my encouragement to families is, you know, not all hope is lost. Make sure that for yourselves at home, you are creating space for your kids to play in an unstructured manner. Get them off their iPads. You know, for your child to come to you and say, I'm bored, is a fantastic thing for them to say, right? So your job really is to send them back to go and play. And after time, you'll see how their natural creativity and imagination will kick in. And so that's so important, because they aren't getting that at school as much as they used to. And so making sure on the weekends after school, you have a time for just unstructured play for the kids, whether they've got a sibling or not, is so important. So those years aren't lost.
Agree. And also get them to sing, because we're not allowed to sing at school either.
Yeah. So karaoke at home. But also, I think something that both of you have now reiterated is Mike talking about the iPad and Jeanette talking about the over-reliance in technology, is it's also extremely difficult for parents to say to their children, put down the screen time, when the parents are sat at home also forced in front of a screen the whole day. And basically you're telling your child, do not do this. And here you are the whole day. And they're kind of putting two and two together. So I can imagine that as a very difficult conversation to have with the children. So unstructured play is definitely something that's very important. So I think if we could, then I would like to move into a specific question for you, Jeanette, is how does Winstedt differ differ from other schools? You said you guys look after children who learn differently. Could you tell us about, you know, that experience, and the admissions have increased? Tell us more about that, please.
So Winstedt was created 12 years ago for children who learn differently. So some of the students have a diagnosis. They might have ADHD, it might be dyspraxia, dyslexia, maybe a communication delay, but everyone can cope with the mainstream curriculum. So we follow the UK curriculum. They just need a little bit more support. So there are a maximum of 15 students in a class with 2 teachers. One is a senior teacher and the other is the collaborative teacher. So it's not a teacher assistant. They're 2 qualified teachers in each classroom. And with that, we also have a team approach. So on the team, if you walked in, you would have an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, a school counselor or psychologist, the heads of department plus me on the child's team. So it's a very much integrated approach to help each child. Each child has a plan and all these strategies are put in place for each child. With that, it's understood that every child has a very different learning journey. So it's got to be quite unique. But we're also very lucky that we have the team of OTs and SLTs, occupational therapists and speech therapists on campus working with the teachers. So they pop into the classroom, they observe the students, they observe the teachers, they make some suggestions for what the teachers need to change. So in their lesson planning or in the way that they are communicating with the students, things that they need to change. And they're also looking for things that can be put in place to just make the child more comfortable within the classroom. Then in addition to that, they're also doing little groups. So they might work with executive functions and helping children organize or timetable and plan. Or they might help with regulation. It depends what each class is working on, but they go in to help the teachers with that class. And then the pastoral care is also helping with that social emotional. So not necessarily doing all the lessons for the teachers, but teaching the teachers how to teach the lessons for their students. So this integrated approach is from reception all the way through to year 13. But we have a very different group of students joining us for each school. So for early years, there might be the child that needs early intervention and the parents realize it. So they seek Winstedt out because they want that early years intervention. And the children that get those strategies and that support, maybe particular reading and writing programs, they learn those strategies and they're quite successful in junior school and they might move on. And then we get another group coming in junior school where they haven't had that early intervention and they are falling further and further behind in their school. That the schools might be good, they might have the right teachers, but they don't have enough resources or time. And that child just needs a bit of support. But their self-esteem might have taken a shock because they haven't been able to read as well or write as well as their peers. When they get to middle school and they haven't had any intervention, then we're dealing with way more behavior because they are so frustrated academically. They cannot they cannot do their homework on time. Perhaps they've got the planning that is difficult for them to figure out when to do homework and what to start with first and how to get started. So middle school is a little bit different, that we have to put in way more intervention, but we have to be clever how we do it because you're dealing with tweens or teens who need a very clever way to sort of mentor and motivate them. And then senior school, we have our students who've been with us throughout and have made incredible progress, and they'll finish with their high school diploma, and some of them might do O-levels. And others who are coming in, but they cannot access the text, they cannot access what perhaps they know, but they can't put it on paper, or they struggle and they need those sort of strategies. And again, might have other behavior, sort of over-reliance on technology again, that we need to help with. They might not want to go to counseling because they're teenagers and that's just too much to have to deal with. But if they work outside with one of our teachers on a motorbike and fix that in the morning before going to class, that's a form of therapy or a form of counseling that they are in tune with and are willing to do. Playing basketball with one of the teachers after school, learning how to ride a bike. There are other ways that you can do counseling. It doesn't have to be in a counselor's office. And Winstedt sort of provides this environment, figuring out what each child needs and putting it in place. And breathe.
That's brilliant. I wish rather than getting detention, I was told to go and fix a motorbike. I would have really loved that. One of the things they made us do as discipline, if you just didn't fit the mold, was you would have to walk on the cricket pitch and pick up stones and then put them in a bag. And then at the end of it, you had to go to the guy who was supervising and show him how many stones you had picked up. And once you had picked up 100 stones, you could leave. So I see Mark laughing. I can imagine that you do the same in Cape Town.
Oh man, you bring up so many memories. I remember having to weed the cricket pitch. Oh man, yeah.
We had to pick up cigarette butts, stompies.
Yeah.
That was
man. The good old days, right? Jeez, how things have changed, thankfully.
But Jeanette, it sounds like a really, really supportive, well thought out methodology from the young ages all the way through to the teenagers. Also, you know, the student teacher ratio and giving the teachers the support they need as well. It sounds very, very good.
In hindsight, I most probably needed to go to a Winstedt. I struggled in primary school and just needed that extra support. It's not saying that the child is done. Child can't learn. They need to be taken out of a big school and put into a small school because they can't learn. It's just saying something's not right. Stop bulldozing your way through it, figure what's wrong, and putting those strategies in place for that child. Yeah. Brilliant.
And Mike, that kind of brings us along into you mentioned Knightsbridge is now a startup, and it's can you tell us about what have you guys been focusing on in starting up in terms of your vision and your mission,
sure.
and your approach to bringing quality education at an affordable rate?
Yeah. So look, I mean, as I said before, the market in Singapore has really changed significantly. And look, we're not the first mid-market school. There've been a few. Our founder actually founded Invictus as well. But really the goal, or I suppose the vision, is to be able to bring high quality, affordable international education to Singapore and really make it sustainable. There are so many families who don't have the options that others do to be able to put their kids into, you know, Dulwich, SAS, Tangland, whatever it might be. But yet they still want to live a life here. They still want to live the expat life. But they might have, you know, 2, 3, or 4 kids, right? And you times that by 40 grand a year. So families want to take back a little bit of ownership. And that's where our school comes in, and together with other mid-market schools, right? To be able to provide an opportunity for students to still have an international education, but at an affordable fee. Now, you know, there's many factors in Singapore that make affordable international education hard. And so, you know, it's riding a pretty fine line, but it is sustainable and it is working. If you look across the board at mid-market schools, generally they are all full or close to full. Whereas if you look at, apart from your legacy schools of SAS, Tangland, and UWC, all of your other for-profit international schools, mainstream international schools, you know, they are fighting over a diminishing market. And so that's why we see way more effort and energy going into marketing efforts by these schools to try and capture some of that market share. Whereas so many families are making the choice to actually go to a mid-market school. What I always say to families, particularly at a primary school level, the most important thing you're looking for is a great teacher in the classroom and a great learning environment. All of the other things around the side, those are largely irrelevant. They're nice to have, but at a primary school level, let's think about your child 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. What really matters for your child? You want to make sure you got a teacher who first and foremost loves your child and is there to really invest in your child's life. And you want to make sure your child is going to school in a really nice environment. They're meeting friends, they're having fun, they're engaged. Outside of that, everything else is a bonus. And so that's where our school is positioning ourselves. We want to create an amazing classroom experience. We have some incredible educators, and obviously learning spaces as well. We're launching a second campus now in November. And so we just wanting to do that, and we want to do that very well. And for 12 grand a year, we can do that. We can't promise you the world. I'm not going to promise you a climbing wall and an Olympic swimming pool. You know, if you want that, then you must go pay 40 grand and get that, right? But if you're just wanting a great teacher in the classroom, a great learning experience for your child, benchmarked internationally, then, you know, our school is the right school for you. And we're seeing it, you know, we're seeing families, many families leaving some of these more established, larger schools, coming to our school, and families making a choice to sort of, in one way, downscaling is not the right word, but you know what I mean, just sort of simplifying life a little bit and saying, right, let's just simplify life. My kids are going to come to the school. We're going to save a ton of money. My kids are going to be happy. They're going to grow. They're going to learn. And then those funds can be invested elsewhere in your family's life or in their college education, who knows. So that's where we're positioning ourselves. And I think that's going to be, for the next 10 years, a really growing market here in Singapore. You know, we think, well, we know education has shifted in Singapore, but it's going to continue to shift and evolve. And I mean, my sort of forecast is you'll see more and more buyouts happening of some of those larger schools. You've already seen it that my previous school I was at was bought out. So you'll see more and more of that happening. And as long as investment keeps coming in and not only, you know, leaving, then it's okay. But it's not always that easy. So smaller schools, community schools, I think that's definitely where the focus is going to be. So yeah, that's a bit about us.
Brilliant. Why I also really wanted to bring you guys together and to speak to the community is because you represent two different areas completely. And it's not often that you could also find South African leadership at that level as well. So it's really fantastic. And I really do believe in what both of you are doing. And now, as South Africans, all of us had a really great upbringing in terms of involvement in physical activity, because I mean, that's what we do. And so the next thing I wanted to ask you, and Jeanette, you mentioned this in terms of also counseling being a, you know, perhaps playing basketball with someone, a teacher after school. And Mike, you were talking about like an Olympic pool and a climbing wall. Is all of that really necessary? I mean, the question, what impact do you think sport has on children's development?
Well, look, it is a huge impact, no doubt. I mean, I'm a sports nut. I'm a PE teacher by training, so you know, you don't have to convince me. It's absolutely critical. It's vital. But I think we have to look at the context that we're in. You know, when we grew up in South Africa, obviously we were in a very sports mad, or depends on the school you're at, but a sports mad society. And really, you didn't have a choice. You know, you go to school, you have to. I remember at my school, it's mandatory. You have to do one summer sport, one winter sport, you know, or whatever it is, you know, and just it's just non-negotiable, right? I wish they would have had that emphasis on things like the arts or other things. But anyway, it was a bit one-sided. But that was the culture. And so everyone just got on with it. And you just knew, okay, polo, cricket, summer, rugby, winter, whatever it might be. And so I think we have to look at the culture here. It's a very different context. It's a different society, right? There isn't that sort of sense of, you know, fighting for Paul boys, you know, I'm, you know, in whatever team. There just isn't that. And no matter how much you try and recreate that in an international school, even at Tanglin or SAS, you're never going to get it, because it's a transient place, as Jeanette spoke about. So people are coming for a few years, they're leaving. They don't have that deep-seated sort of passion for their school, you know, that you might have had in South Africa because your parents went to the same school. It's life and death, you know, it's the derby of the town. You just don't have that. But that doesn't mean that sport isn't absolutely vital and critical. So what you see in Singapore is your inter-school sport, and obviously pre-COVID it was there, but it was never great, if I'm honest. It's there, it's okay, but you can't come with the same expectations that you're going to be having, like you may have in South Africa or Australia or New Zealand or the UK or wherever you might be. It's different. but still having kids to be physically active through physical education and through participation is so, so important. And that's something that's been taken away now with COVID. And I really hope they allow ECAs to pick up again and carry on soon. Because, you know, we speak about unstructured play and how valuable that is for social and emotional development. Well, so is sport and team sport, and getting students to be able to play collaboratively, to lose well, and also to win well. It's so, so important. So look, not every school is going to have the facilities, and that's okay. You don't have to do a sport at your school. There's many other, you know, incredible providers for sports and enrichment activities in Singapore, which you can reach out to. Actually, some quite amazing places.
Yeah.
So it's finding that balance for you and your family and what's right, you know. Yeah, I just think it's so healthy for kids to be outdoors and playing, but we do need to acknowledge it's a very, very different context to the context we know of in South Africa.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
very well said, Mike. I think there are plenty of clubs, sports that are they're great. The football, the rugby clubs. Join one of those. I mean, we very similarly we're spending a lot of time doing other things after school. There are sports, but it's not your rugby, and we're focusing more on cross country is one of our biggest ones, and I think it's because it's an individual thing, and perhaps it's also they like to challenge themselves and their stamina, but it's not really competitive. It's very different from back home. And there are plenty of activities that you can do. We've got a farm out back, which is actually just a plot of land that we can't grow anything on. But it's a farm because it's got a couple of chickens and that. The kids love being out there and trying to clean it up. That's their physical activity. They love it. And I think they would prefer, I think they do, but they prefer that over a fancy swimming pool. I'd rather we have the farm where they feel like they are responsible for the chickens and looking at, have that empathy and care. There's so much more that they're learning from that than a swimming pool, which they can get elsewhere. We're providing something different. But sports, important, very important.
Absolutely, guys. Like that was brilliant. Thank you very much. And me looking back, I do think it was a little bit do or die for sports, and perhaps we should have looked at other areas too. So we've just got under 10 minutes left, and with our audience, everyone who is with us, thank you very much for being with us, and I hope you've enjoyed this conversation so far. I certainly have. I was wondering if you have any questions at all, please feel free to put them in the chat to us. Anything that you think perhaps you're looking for insights from Michael or Jeanette from their experiences that we could share with you. Let's see if we get any conversation going. Well, while we wait for some questions to come through, so Jeanette, you mentioned the farm. Do you have any other animals on there besides the chickens?
One duck. One duck and 4 or 5, depending on the day, 4 or 5 chickens.
I think that's awesome. That's so good, because I just think it, you know, it exposes students to something that you don't traditionally find in Singapore, you know, and look, we all love Singapore, but it is a very controlled, fairly sterile environment, you know, and to expose kids to sort of, you know, farm life, however it might look, that is so cool. And the kids, the memories they're going to make, you know, going in there, cleaning up the farm, I mean, they're going to remember that for the rest of their life. It's amazing. So
we've used it also for, there's some students who don't like Monday mornings too much. And that's their incentive to get here on a Monday morning. Is to get in and play with the chickens and clean out the coop. And I thought, who wants to do that? It sounds revolting. And there they are on a Monday morning, ready to go to school because they get to clean out the chicken coop. Yeah.
Well, we do have one question here, and I'm just Bao Gao. I'm going to unmute you, and you can ask your question. Oh, sorry, she's written it through. She says, I'm quite confused by the various curriculum on offer. We have the English, RPC, and RB. in particular, if we were ever to return to South Africa, would kids take time to adjust back to an IEB curriculum? What do you think?
It's a very good question. And I think it's a question Jeanette and I have to answer every week of our lives. It's absolutely critical. I think, so what you have to just look at, all right, because if we think about the PYP and the IPC in particular, all right, and my school currently does IPC, but for 10 years I taught and led in the PYP environment. Largely, those schools have a high level of autonomy in terms of how they implement those curriculum frameworks. All right. And so if we look at the PYP, for example, it's a curriculum framework, and the school interprets that and actually really develops their own curriculum within that framework. And so you have to evaluate the school. And so what you need to do, also knowing that a good curriculum takes several years to develop, you have to look at where is each school benchmarking their curriculum. So a good school should take, let's say, the IPC, the PYP, and then they should underpin that with a national curriculum standard. So like the UK curriculum, for example, is widely used, and coming from South Africa, it's fairly aligned. All right. And so that would ensure that your child is still working towards internationally rigorous benchmarks, so that if your child did return home, yes, they're learning within an IPC context, but they are still learning towards UK curriculum outcomes for numeracy and literacy. And then that'll give you a greater level of confidence. They're not just learning this wonderful international curriculum where everyone's saving the whales and doing this incredible stuff, but they aren't actually learning, or where they need to be academically at the end of every year. So, so one thing we do, we assess the students at the start and end of every quarter, and so that we can track student data to ensure that students are progressing according to the grade level stipulated outcomes that the UK curriculum and the Singapore math curriculum state. That way, if a child had to leave at any point of the year, we're not waiting for the final year assessment. We can tell you in April, okay, well, yep, Johnny is on track. Here's some areas of development, and here's some things that he or she can do very well. And so it's very, very important that the school you choose knows that and is benchmarked to some national curriculum at some point.
I agree with that. I think very well said, actually, Mike. And the other thing is that there needs to be that transition. There needs to be a level of support that they offer you when you get to the other side. There will be some things that your child will be ahead in, and there'll be some things just because of the local context that they might be behind it. And the school needs to, we would do it for students coming here, we would figure out where the gaps are, and we would put in a plan in place to help the child with those gaps. I think it also, there are two other things, is it depends on your child and who they are. And what kind of learner or what they're struggling with. Yet the choice of school is key. The other thing is, where are they in their academics? Like primary school, not such a train smash. If there are things that can be put in place. You're heading towards senior school, it's what are they going to finish up with? Are they working on their credits for a high school diploma here? How will that relate back home, and what kind of final exams they'll be taking? I think different parents, different beliefs, different children, different learning, and where they are in their academic journey. You'd have tougher questions at a later stage.
Guys, thank you. We've got, sorry, we've got actually an influx here, and people are very interested in your opinions on a few matters. So I'm going to unmute one of the participants to ask their question.
Hello, thank you, Michael. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
It's a great sharing. This is Bo from the AI Club Asia. Actually, we are driven the AI solutions in the business world. However, we're also looking the equal and inclusive education for young generations about AI, artificial intelligence. So we are launching this kind of program for teenagers, 14 to 16 years old, or originally 11 years old, but to enable them for AI related things connecting with the industrial organizations and leaders, and we have different workshops and things. So this program will be launched in Q1 next year. My question to Mike and Jeanette is that, how's your programs, the school's innovation program, you call it the STEM or you call it the ICE 21 or whatever, the current education. I'm a mom of 2 teenagers. I always ask myself, what the kids are learning nowadays in the school will be useful for them in the future, especially this pandemic facilitated a lot of digital transformation. A lot of leading organizations right now facing the crisis or challenges if they are not fast enough to adjust for that. Not to mention right now, children are the future. How's the education on this part, which is not included in the curriculum, which is developed decades ago or even hundreds of years ago? So what in your school, these initiatives regarding to this innovation, new technologies and programs? And I'm really very keen to catch up with you after the meeting to discuss, because this program is free for children. So I'm also thinking how open you are to this, and what's your current measures, and what's your view in the long run for this to enrich the children. Yeah. Thank you. That's my question. Yeah.
Right. So technology in the school context and building a future-proof education system. Do you guys have a view?
Yeah, I can jump in quickly on that. So we don't have any devices in our school. I'll be quite honest with you on that. We do run coding lessons once a week for our students, and we have devices that they use specifically for that lesson. But actually by design, we don't have devices in the school. For 6 years before, I worked in a one-to-one school, and there's some benefits to that. And obviously, with relevant educational technology, there's of course, value that can be added. For where we are right now, I think there's other areas of focus that are perhaps more beneficial for students in terms of the development. Look, I'm a big believer in EdTech. When EdTech is used to be a benefit and to add to education, I think a lot of time it can detract from education and be something that actually just gets in the way. So that's where we are at the moment. We don't have devices in our school, but that doesn't mean we're not connected to EdTech and what good practice should be.
We do plenty of computing, but it's also again linked to the UK curriculum, and it's a lot of safeguarding, a lot of cyberbullying. It's helping the students realize how to be responsible with tech. We have to use tech for our accommodations as well. So students will use it for speech to text and for some other programs that help them with their learning. Then in senior school, it gets a little trickier because we've got to prepare them for whatever is going to happen in the next 20, 30 years that I have no idea what that will look like. But we do use external colleges to help us with that. So within career studies, the students go off to Raffles Design and they do some programs on campus there. And we do use tech for gamification. It does encourage certain students with their reading, but it's very controlled. We have students who are very susceptible to overusing technology, and it needs to be done in a way where the students are feeling responsible and in control of how much they use.
Brilliant. One that's quite an interesting one that's come through is, how would you deal with teenagers who don't want to play outside? Reminds me of my sister.
That's a layered question.
Yeah, I think you'd have to look at the motivation behind it. Who's wanting the child to play outside? What's the context of it?
Are they hot? There's so many things. We put in different plans for different students, and there's usually a reason why they don't want to go outside. And figuring out the reason. And I'd hate to try and figure out on this what the reason
Understood.
is. But
Yeah, no blanket answer to this.
Look, I think also we got to keep asking the question why. Okay, so our general understanding is we want kids to play outside so they can be physically active and obviously lead a healthy life. In Singapore, it's different, right? It's not as easy to play outside here as it is, in South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, or somewhere else where there's a more moderate climate. So, I mean, that's a reality. We can't downplay that. And as a teenager, I can imagine that can be the real issue for someone. So if we put it back to the why, let's think about physical activity. So how else can we get your child to be physically active? Are there other ways that they can do that? Maybe other ways that are more engaging. And so I would ask that question as opposed to just forcing them to get outside. Now, they might just need to get outside, right? That could be the reality, but there also might be something a little bit more to that you could still solve, but in a different way.
Brilliant. Again, I agree. Can't blanket that. There must be another reason, right? Last question that we will do, and to the audience who stayed with us, thank you very much. So this one is, and they say, obviously this depends a lot on the child or the parent, but in broadly speaking terms, how long before you can commit a child to a school should you start looking?
I would say a lot's depend on your family circumstance. I think Jeanette mentioned it earlier. Some families come to Singapore having done a huge amount of research, knowing the 3 schools they're going to go visit, speak to the principals, whatever, or some just not at all. So it really is largely dependent on you and your family's needs in terms of how long and how much time you should spend looking for a school. I would say know what you want first, and then you go to the market and look and see who's going to provide the best for you and your family. So your price point, your location, your curriculum, how long you're going to be here in Singapore. That'll determine, if your child's in primary, okay, that's fine. Really, actually any curriculum should be fine for them, right? If they're in middle and high school and you're thinking you're going to be here for 5 years, well, you're going to be thinking about university acceptance in college. So how are you positioning your child? Where do you want him or her to go to? And that takes a bit more time, a bit more research, but I think it's largely dependent on each circumstance.
I think also keep in mind that some schools are starting in August, some schools are starting in January. So what would you prefer? Some schools have rolling enrollment, some schools don't. Some schools have waiting lists. So I think that you've got to keep that in mind. And again, back to your family values, back to your family beliefs and what you need.
Okay. I think that's quite concise, guys. So everyone, we've gone 5 minutes over the hour, so we'll leave it there. I have got all of your questions coming through here. And what I will do is I will send them to the speakers to ask for comment, and then afterwards we will email you the answer. So Mike, Jeanette, thank you very much for speaking with us today and providing your insights, speaking with our community. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope I can meet you both in person when these restrictions ease.
Yep.
Thanks so much, guys. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Now, before I let you go, if people want to reach you, what is the best way for them to find you? So Mike, if people wanted to find out more about you and Knightsbridge?
Yeah, probably the best is if you want to reach me personally, you can just reach out on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on that platform. I'd love to connect with you there and see if I can be of assistance. Then obviously if it's relating to Knightsbridge House, obviously we have a school website, kbh.edu.sg. You can go there and you can find out all the information about our school there. So thanks so much. I've enjoyed this.
Thanks, Mike. And for yourself, Jeanette, how can people find you?
Also on LinkedIn, Jeanette Buckley. I'm there. Otherwise, through Winstedt, emails there. And if anyone wants to know more, I can chat to them. Or our admissions, Alison is also a South African, just coincidental. So if we can always show you around and have another talk, always willing.
Brilliant. Well, guys, thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon. To our audience, I'd like to also just say thank you very much on behalf of the Chamber for joining us today and during your lunchtime. We are trying our best to host as many initiatives like this to bring value to the community in all shapes and forms in this pandemic. So if you want to learn more about what we're doing, please go to our website. It's simply sham.sg, and you can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Our YouTube channel is pretty cool, so check it out, please. And we'll see you in the next event. Thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon.